Hey everybody, I'm Ravi Lachhman, and thanks for coming to the Unscripted conference. Today, we have our DevSecOps panel with three amazing panelists. We have Milecia, Baruch, and Seb. So Milecia, Milecia, why don't you introduce yourself first, and then we can start introducing everybody.
All right, so my name is Milecia McGregor, and right now I'm a developer advocate at Conducto. When we make our own CI/CD tools, no YAML by the way, but I've been a senior software engineer. I've done some tech writing and a lot of conference speaking. So I'm just super excited to be here to kind of nerd out with you guys for a while.
Seb?
Hello, my name is Sebastian Daehne. I'm a senior manager for DevOps and security here at LogMeIn. I'm with the company for 20 years. Fun fact, a good portion of that was me studying, extended this a little bit, and then went on from, let's say, backend programming into more the DevOps space and also started managing this. We understand DevOps is in a support role, not as a team who owns software, and as such also we understand the security part of it.
Awesome. Baruch?
And I'm Baruch Sadogursky. I'm head of DevOps Advocacy with JFrog. And we in JFrog have a tool that helps implementing some of the principles of DevSecOps. And I'm true believer in DevOps and this DevSecOps practices. So very excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Ravi.
Oh, absolutely. So why don't we start with this? Even the word DevSecOps, it sounds like it's DevOps plus one more adjective or noun in between. DevSecOps. So maybe we can start with what would be a definition if you had to talk to, let's say, someone who's familiar with DevOps but not familiar with DevSecOps? Like, how would you define DevSecOps?
I have opinions. Should I go?
Sure.
Right. Okay. So DevSecOps is a marketing term. The idea, and I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing. I really don't. The idea is that after like 7-8 years of DevOps, and that will be like 4 years ago, people started to realize that they forget something, and this something is security, because we spoke about DevOps for many years as the common purposes and the common goals of Dev and Ops and QA sometimes, but security never brought up. And obviously without including security in the mix and having them join the party, nothing changed, because in the end of the day, as we know from Eliyahu Goldhardt, the goal, if we don't optimize at the bottlenecks, we don't optimize at all. And as long as security were sitting in their silo, either the ivory tower from which they dictated that no one is allowed to do anything, or the other way around, were beaten to the corner and no one gave them any attention until there was a security incident, we didn't achieve anything, because the bottleneck was just moved from the interaction between Dev and Ops and QA to interaction of those empowered teams and those entire organizations with the security silo. And this understanding brought us to try and fight it. And one of the ways is talking a new term that we can talk about and reason about and express why it's important. So yes, DevSecOps does not exist. It's just DevOps, but we need to talk about it. And this is why this marketing term exists.
Awesome. And yeah, go ahead, Sebastian.
I totally agree. The sec at some point was also replaced by a Q, so there's also DevQOps. And it can be a marketing term, but we also can use it as a vehicle to transport what we actually mean by real DevOps. And it's the ownership end-to-end, and security or quality assurance is definitely part of that. And so it is a marketing term to, in certain cases, really highlight that we also now need to focus. It should always have been focused on, but as you pointed correctly out, sometimes security was in the ivory tower, and let's push the ownership of the end-to-end process into the team and give them the tools that they need in order to achieve that. And I think this is the key part of DevOps. It's not now the team does everything, the team needs the tools in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I'll kind of add on to that. It really is, I'll agree with both of y'all. It's just another marketing term. It's like, I think the other one is rugged DevOps or something like that. And it's basically the same thing. It's all just
heard of
security
rugged.
plus DevOps.
It does sound rugged. I do like the name. rugged DevSecOps. We can coin that. That came out of Unscripted. It's all of ours now. Let's see what else. And so going back to like exactly like all three of you had very good points of view there, and there had to be some sort of genesis. I'll save the most complicated question for Sebastian because he probably deals with this all the time. So I'll reserve that for the subsequent question. But why do you think there was a rise in DevSecOps? Do you think it's because of the lack of expertise? You think that we're moving really fast? It's 2020. We're under the gun for more agility. But why do you think there's a rise in DevSecOps practices?
Start rise. So ever since we started to adopt DevOps, the whole ecosystem gained speed. We develop quicker, we deploy quicker, and with that, we also deploy malicious code quicker. We also deploy onto systems that are not patched, etc. And so people realize that in the process, we have now this cool pipeline that deploys pretty quickly. We need to make sure that the software is secure, that the systems we deploy on is secure. And we invested in automation. And now we also need to add the security parts to the automation, like static code analysis in the front, shifting left. The earlier you do it, the better it is. In the meantime, process where you start up your processes, you test against this, some integration testing, look at the interfaces. So to answer your question, I think it is due to the speed that we gained in the industry in developing and deploying applications. And people realized, let's now push into those pipelines security assurances.
Yeah, makes sense. Baruch or Moshe, do you have anything else to add or subtract to that?
Yeah, so I think that's what we spoke about, right? So the bottleneck shifted, and I think it makes sense that 10 years ago, the bottleneck was really between those silos of dev and ops, and this is why it came to be. And you remember the Phoenix project and everything around it, that was the biggest pain, right? The software was thrown over the fence from dev to ops, and then ops was stuck with it, and that was the biggest pain. And now, 10 years later, thankfully, this pain is gone. So now we have another bottleneck. By theory of constraints, just works. And this bottleneck now is security, which is either too restrictive or either left to to its own devices, and then when shit hit the fan, this is where we got it. And now we solve the next bottleneck, and it makes perfect sense. This is how it should be. It's a natural progression of things, and it's great.
Yeah, I'll kind of chime in. I think it's started something interesting though. So now developers have, I guess, they get the feedback a lot faster. So that changes kind of how sprint planning works and how features get added, because that feedback just comes back so much faster. And it's not just a fire we need to put out to get changes to prod anymore. That's been kind of, I don't know, an interesting change to hear about from developers, just because some of them love it, some of them hate it. It just adds a tiny bit more work, but I think overall it really makes people more conscious of the code that they write, because you don't want to have to deal with the security things coming back to you. You don't want to have to deal with tests failing as soon as you deploy. So I think shifting to the left has been a good thing overall.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Awesome explanations. And here comes a more complicated one for Sebastian now. Yeah, waiting for him. But I think also I'll phrase it with this. I think all three of y'all can answer this question too. So we also, first of all four of us work for very forward-thinking engineering organizations, right? But I admit we still struggle with DevSecOps, even though we hire really good talent, we educate people really well. And so let's do a little bit of role playing, Sebastian. So let's say I'm an average engineer at your firm. Part of the challenge with DevSecOps, what I've seen is that there's always like some sort of skills gap. Like your engineers, I'm an AppSec engineer. This is the little tricky part. If I was an average engineer at your firm, like where would you say my skills fall short? And this is where your organization has to step in. Like, have you seen any common knowledge gaps that you have to build into a platform, or I'm not sure if that question makes sense.
We need to start at awareness. So the average engineer is focused on developing code, pushing it out. This awareness that this code pulls in requirements, pulls in libraries. If you think about the node ecosystem, you need to be sure that whatever you pull in is secure, that it's scanned. So I would not start with a skill gap. I would say let's first raise the awareness of the engineer on what you're building and deploying. By giving him tools to whatever you try to build, shows it to you. And I think also in 2020, those type of tools, they just grew and started to become usable. So I would start with the awareness, and then it depends on which part of security we're talking about. If you usually people, if you program C++, you are aware of in C++ how you manage memory, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. But if you then talk about, maybe you also know about how certificates work, but if it gets more complex on TLS handshakes, that's where people need guidance and help from security and security engineers who they can reach out to and who advocate the teams.
Yeah, Baruch or Milecia.
I have the wildest smile now when Sebastian talked about it, because this is like so on point. I think the biggest problem that DevSecOps try to fix is the awareness problem, like we said. And the problem is that security is an extremely complex topic that is not on the top of mind of developers or even ops people, right? They don't think about that first. And the example that Sebastian rose, the dependencies problem, is something that is obviously, as being with JFrog for so many years, something that is very dear for my heart. Yes, that's a huge problem. People don't think about it. And even if they do, they don't think about it in all the complexity the problem brings, because it's not just what dependencies you use, it's just what dependencies those dependencies used. And the more you are abstracting away to be productive as a developer, the more the security problems starting to lurk in the shadows. And now when software is so complex and we abstract away so much, there are huge areas of security which are completely out of our sight and out of our mind. And they are out for a good reason, because they are very complex. Not because we're lazy, but just because we as humans have certain capabilities, mental capabilities, that cannot cover everything. And this is one of the reasons why we need to remember that DevOps and DevSecOps is not about understanding everything. It's about working together with people who understand different domains in this insanely complex discipline, which is a software engineering of today.
And something else that I would add to that is a part of that awareness is also some unfamiliarity just with pipelines in general. Since we've started that shift left process, I've noticed there are more just app developers that are responsible for maintaining the CI/CD pipelines as well. And that's causing problems with people just might not understand, like, when you would parallelize processes versus when you would just send it through. Like, it's just so many little things that people don't know anymore because it's changed. And it's going to take everybody some time to just get up to date and, of course, aware that this stuff exists. Like, getting DevOps implemented itself is a challenge, but adding that security on top of it is just taking it to the next level that really it shouldn't be seen that way. It just is, because everybody leaves security out until there's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may, we need to be careful to generalize too much, because I've also witnessed pull left when you have skilled engineers who heard about security. Not every developer per se doesn't know anything about security. People are also wanting to invest. We have programs where normal engineers then are working with security and a champion program, and they are also heavily engaged. And then it's not just the shift left. The shift also feels like doing this for people. I would also say there is a pull left to try to do this earlier.
Yeah, no, I agree. I didn't claim that people don't want to know, right? What I claim is it's just impossible, right? And dependencies is a great example. I mean, if you understand, you start with, I don't know what's going on, probably it's very dangerous. And then you come to a point, well, I understand it pretty well, and now I can make it safe. But then the next level of knowledge is, okay, now I know that I cannot make it safe, right? So it's just, it's very hard to impossible to ensure this knowledge in the engineering teams. And this is where, and I hope I build up for your next question, Ravi, but we'll see. I think this is where the importance of automation comes in.
Absolutely. I think so that actually brings up a good segue. So unfortunately, not every organization has access to a Milecia, a Sebastian, or Baruch, like rare breed of folks with this level of expertise. I'll be a little bit greedy. I got to see Milicia's talk already, and so I might tee this up to you first, Milecia. Like, if someone had to get started, because there's so much domain, right? Like going back to Sebastian's point, pulling left, like. Part of your talk was like actually where you get started. So for folks who like say are totally green to this movement, unless you're like, where do you think that people should get started? Easy, low hanging fruit. I'm completely new to security at this point.
I'm completely new to security in DevOps.
Or I know, or I know about, like, I know I should be secure, but I don't know how secure I should be. So,
so I guess one place that would be just a good start, as much as we all kind of hate/ignore it, if you're running anything that has like packages or libraries, just do a quick audit of those. Like if you're in JavaScript world, an npm audit will show you a lot of those vulnerabilities and risks. And the OWASP top 10, if you don't know what the security vulnerabilities are to begin with, that's a really, really good resource. It has like all of the top 10s, like cross-site scripting, it has broken authentication, and it tells you how to fix them and some of the tools that you can use to test for. And then on the CI/CD side of things, as far as like implementing tests in a pipeline, just I don't have any affiliation with Sneak, but their tool is extremely easy to integrate into any pipeline. It's just another package you install and it checks your pipeline for like out-of-date packages, for those cross-site SQL injection type attacks and stuff like that. But that would be kind of a gentle intro into DevSecOps.
awesome, Sebastian or Baruch, any first steps?
Yeah, I would start on two fronts here. First, you're talking DevOps, you're most certainly deploying some sort of containers. And there are various tools that scan the container for content. So all known vulnerabilities in this container, this is easy to integrate. It has also room for false positives, but it gives you a first hint on what you're trying to push out before you do so. And then you can stop pushing or pulling this left and scan easier. And the second part I really would encourage is static code analysis. Depending on the programming language, is rather sophisticated or in its infancy. But this gives you very, very early feedback that the code that you actually wrote is secure.
Gotcha, Baruch.
Yeah, and I would go like on a more global level, and I would say that the first step would be realizing that you don't know and realizing that you probably cannot know. In terms of what we spoke about, it's just too much. And then I would say deploying the machines is the right way to do. Is the right way to go. And what I mean is that using today's level of automation around security can provide us with much better protection than trying to learn everything there is to learn and know that everything what's going on. And the relying on automation can actually be more productive than saying, well, I will just try to understand what's going on.
Yeah, makes absolutely perfect sense. I think as we start to, I'm going to start using Sebastian's term more, pull left. I'm going to steal it. So
Fine.
as we start to pull left, there becomes like a more intrinsic like engineering challenge. And I view all three panelists as like engineering thought leaders, right? It's as an engineering leader, one thing that we always try to do is that we want to make sure that we're supporting innovation, but we also have to be able to support control. So how do we start striking a balance between innovation and control? Open-ended question for any one of the panels. It's the two radio dials that we have to maintain.
I don't think there's a right answer to this.
It's
Yeah,
hard.
let me try. I have opinions,
Okay.
as I already said. I think the balance, and again, I'm going to the automation part, can be solved exactly there. And what I mean by that is, by the end of the day, I realize the need of certifying the what we are doing. But my claim would be that you can certify the process instead of certifying each and every release. And this is how you remove the bottlenecks. And but I can give you two examples, one directly related to security, but maybe I'll start with another which is related for quality assurance and testing, because it's kind of easier to get our head around that. It's closer to software engineering per se. And I would say we have two options. We can do manual QA. We can stop our pipeline and then take each and every release and test the hell out of it and not moving forward until we can guarantee the quality, which is obviously the way we used to do it and some organizations still do. But the bottleneck is right there, very clear, and it's understandable why it's not a good idea. Instead, we are doing something else. So yes, we take the releases and without blocking them, we perform exploratory testing. We see what new have broke or what new can we test. And once we realize that, we encode it into the pipeline itself. So then we actually guarantee the quality by improving the pipeline and not necessarily each and every release. And I claim that we can do the same with security. Once we do the exploratory testing in security, call it the blue team hacking, or it's people who try to break your software on purpose, just like exploratory testing, but for security, then we can code the protections against it into the pipeline. And once we do that, we can still release fast and we can still not block the pipeline, but certifying the pipeline itself and guaranteeing that the pipeline will do the needed protection for us.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of sounds a lot like chaos engineering, where you just make a hypothesis of, hey, if we pull this network cable, what's going to happen to our system? So basically, you can go through and make these hypotheses about these super catastrophic events and test them against that steady state for your app that you've been monitoring and logging for maybe weeks or months, just to see where things fail. And then you can either figure out whether it's like a code deficiency somebody can fix, or if you need to add more resources to a server, whatever it is, those like hypotheses will poke out any of those really, really mean attacks somebody might try.
For that, it would be beneficial to have threat model analysis. Security usually can guide those, and the engineers learn a lot by doing those. And then you can't automate everything, but what comes out of this, you can create tests for, and then it's the quality assurance part, just the security part of it, to make sure that you don't run with TLS 1.1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all those are very, very great ideas. And it's a very difficult question to ask. Like, I know I've seen it here. Sometimes we get reports from this thing called X-ray. I don't know if anybody knows what it's called. And, it's like, what do we do with it, right? So, and it's always like, hey, like going back to all three of your responses, like, hey, what is severe? What is not severe? it's diagnosed to patient because we have also, not trying to be over panelist and moderator here, but we have tiers of apps too, right? So like some things are customer facing, some things are not. I'm not sure if you three have seen something like that before, like do diagnose to patient, different sets of rigor in your experience. Have any of you seen those type of patterns before?
I personally haven't seen that before.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess everything is like always secure. If it's out in the public, it's always a tier 1 application.
I see sometimes the tendency that people understand that it's internal, it's not a problem. But I wouldn't agree with that. So you mentioned blue team, red team, purple team exercises. What's the likelihood of them gaining access to your entire internal system? So you need to think also about that the internal systems need to be secured. You can argue maybe a little less than public systems, but actually, if you can afford this, don't.
The attack vector is always there. Yeah, and even sometimes I forget that, right? Like, make it the public internet. How someone misconfigures a VPC, something flips out. Like, because systems, they're made by humans, right? We're fallible, and so in theory, our systems are fallible also. Changing gears a little bit, knowing the landscape of three experts, knowing the DevSecOps landscape, where do you see DevSecOps headed in 2021? Any sort of shifts or changes? Last couple of years, kind of analysis on composition was big, but any other trends you see coming up 2021 the horizon?
Yeah, go ahead, Milecia.
Thanks, but I think people will start to follow and use those automated tools a lot more. Like, I don't think we'll do maybe the same level of pen testing. I'm not quite sure if I want to say that all the way, but I think it will take away a little bit of that load from pen testers and just force it more into the pipeline and rely on all of these automated tools.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think what I already kind of alluded to, that the automation will be more and more pervasive in the companies that want to survive. And we're talking about evolutionary pressure, right? We're talking about the companies that change and then survive, and the companies that don't and then left behind. And Equifax, if you want, like a gist of what I'm alluding to, and moving forward to survive is adopting DevSecOps. It's pretty clear that we need to tackle this next bottleneck that we are now standing in front, and that's including security in this collaborative methodology that we are trying to implement. And that means realizing the complexity, realizing that we need to invest in the pipeline and automation if we don't want to have the bottlenecks going forward to release, and obviously realizing that we also cannot ignore it and pretend that it does not exist. And in the end of the day, that means that organizations will look for this magic, this silver bullet of how I can still move faster but also be secure. And this is how the shift left and all the continuous security solutions that we are talking about will become more and more critical, and obviously will improve as they are more needed, and there is more competition on the market, and there is more demand. And I think by soon enough it will be for us, all the security automation around pipelines will be for us as trivial and as usual as now, I don't know, like running unit tests in our CI pipeline.
I think the keyword there is collaborative. That the engineering and security departments work together on this. And I would say maybe not forecasting what happened, but I wish that the tooling keeps up with that. In terms of the scanners getting a little bit more intelligent, to understanding what a Docker container is versus what a VM is. That would be helpful, because I don't think we are there yet. and the static code analysis gets quicker. This would help all of us, and shift left the analysis phase.
Yeah, that all makes excellent sense, right? Like certain things it's all about the intelligence that's available to, let's say, the end user or even the administrator. As software, as containers or distributions become different, right? Like understanding how to unpack those become really important, and mapping those to different distributions, different packages, just identifying a needle in the haystack. Kind of like a more intrinsic question. Always like to pick on Sebastian. These intrinsic never coming on a panel with you again. But it comes back to expertise, right? So going back, I really like what you just said about a partnership between security and application engineering. It's like, where do you, who kind of inputs the expertise going by that push and pull? So a little bit of my background, I did some AppSec stuff before, but most of my background, I have like 40 J's on my resume, being a JE developer, for 10 plus years, and then getting into like the Comp Plus stuff, right? So like, where do you meet in the middle? Like, who has the expertise on the system versus security? Everybody's organization's a little bit different, but I always like to put Sebastian on the spot. Like, how do you see that push and pull occur?
So, the engineering team owns the software, and security advises and is embedded into review processes. The same as operations team advise. The normal engineering team has some idea about security, but someone needs to measure, quote unquote, create some KPIs, work together with security teams to grade security, and then agree on what should be improved over the next release, the next year, something like that. So the ownership of the service of whatever you deploy is in engineering. The expertise for the certain specific problem-solving things, that is within the special teams. Because if you have a very good security engineer in your engineering team, it's one engineering team. You might want to share this person.
Yeah, so that the last part is something that I relate to. I think empowered teams of a collection of different people with different disciplines as their core of their T-shape is what really works, and that means that it's all they're all engineering teams, and they obviously have the responsibility for shipping the software, and they have inside their teams both the developers and those whose expertise is development and those whose core expertise is operations and QA and security, etc., etc. Because keeping those teams separately, although we can put a lot of effort into trying to make them collaborate, still is very, very hard to achieve. The collaboration is very hard to achieve because different teams might have different dynamics. They might have been measured differently. They might define their own goals differently. Even if the management will define a unified goal, still having a team of the same people will introduce the internal goals differently. So I think disrupting those teams and bringing the people together into empowered teams of software engineers that deploy software, this is how we move forward. And obviously security people are there, and they are there for all the reasons that we mentioned. They make their comments, they do their contribution on each and every step. When they write the code, when we build the pipeline, when we continuously improve the pipeline to be more and more rigid in terms of how it's protecting our security, and the deployment process and everything else in between.
And then something else that'll probably help is if we just do some basic cross-training. So pair up a security person with a dev and get them to transfer that knowledge between each other. One of the biggest breakdowns is communication. So making sure that everybody is on the same page, that we understand the same jargon and terminology, and just making sure that everybody feels really comfortable with their role and what part they're responsible for is going to be really important too.
Awesome, awesome. I know we're coming up on time. I have one last question for the panelists, and against another kind of like obscure intrinsic question. I used to say that, how do you know if you're doing DevOps? You have a DevOps appliance and it turns blue when you have DevOps. How do you know if or when you're doing DevSecOps effectively, or even if at all? This is the most open-ended question I could ask you three. So.
I think probably the most open-ended answer would be, do you implement security in your pipeline? So basically, are you doing any security checks at all? Because a lot of people just leave those out. Maybe they just don't know which tools they want to agree on or where in the process they want to put it. Maybe it adds too much time. Whatever the reason is, if there's some kind of security test in there, you're probably doing DevSecOps. Maybe not the greatest, but you are doing it.
Awesome.
I think you can easily measure this by the amount of engineers complain about security tools. Because if you use a security tool to validate something in the pipeline, it will find something. If it doesn't find something, that's very unlikely. And if it finds something, engineers tend to complain. But it's also, so it finds something that needs to be fixed afterwards. And if you have that, you're on the right track.
And I agree both with Seb and Milecia that, you know what, just start doing it, right? And start thinking about security is doing DevSecOps. Let's put it that way. And then if it's manual, if it's automatic, if you have more false positives from the tool that an engineering are complaining or less, it's all fine. It's all an adjustment. But the first step is, you know what? Start thinking about it. Start moving toward it, the smallest steps. And as I mentioned, automation is the key for solving a lot of the problems that we have with security in both directions, not thinking about it enough or being in a bottleneck. Both problems should be solved with relentless automation of the security problem, and most importantly, thinking about it and not ignoring it.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at time for our panel. I know we can all talk for hours. I wish we could all be together just drinking coffee somewhere, because Baruch, Milecia, and Sebastian, certainly experts and thought leaders in their field. Even I learned a lot during this particular panel. So thank you all for being on the panel. We really appreciate it. And don't forget to catch the next session at Unscripted.